Hi, welcome Wings, Wheels, and Wires, your channel for tech and travel. And Jim Farley from Ford just made an announcement that will shock the electric vehicle world. And I guess we got to talk about that right now.
Sound the alarm. I'm coming up. We'll have a ball. I'm sweet like...
Alright, so before we get into Jim Farley's comment and why it is so important, there might be some of y'all out there who might need a little bit of background on connector types. So here in the United States, we have three kinds of connectors. You have the CHAdeMO connector, which is for early Japanese vehicles and is being phased out. So for the rest of this conversation, we're not going to talk about that. Then you have the CCS connector and the Tesla connector. Now, in Europe, they have a similar setup, except their CCS connector is called a CCS2 connector. It's fundamentally the same, but there are some differences in the shape. It's flat across the top. In Europe, they decided to have a single standardized connector. So they opted to go with the CCS2 type connector. So Tesla was actually forced to shift over to utilizing a CCS2 connector instead of their own proprietary connector. So if you go and buy a Tesla in Europe, it will have a CCS2 connection instead of a Tesla connection. Here in the US, that isn't the case. We still have the two standards, and you have Tesla having Tesla connection and everyone else using the CCS connection. Now that's starting to change. Aptera, when they released what type of connection they're going to have on their upcoming vehicle, they're actually using the Tesla type connection. And they feel so strongly about that type of connection being so important to use and towards standardization that they actually in July 2022 began a petition to have the US government adopt the Tesla type connector as the national standard for all EVs. They also renamed it from the Tesla connector to the NACS connector, which is North American Charging Standard. So this is supposed to be the standard for all of the US. And this sort of balanced Tesla and Aptera with the NACS and everyone else with CCS would probably have remained the balance for eternity, except now Ford has done something really interesting. This is where their announcement comes in. Jim Farley announced that Ford will start having adapters in 2024 and then fully installing in 2025 the North American Charging Standard instead of CCS.
Would you like to make the announcement?
Yeah. Thank you, Elon. Working with Elon and his team, I'm really excited for our industry and for the Ford customers. We're announcing that in early 2024, all of Ford's existing customers and future customers would have access to 12,000 Tesla superchargers, high-speed superchargers across the U.S. We're really excited about that. We're ramping production, and we think this is a huge move for our industry and for all electric customers. And then about a year later, we're going to be equipping our Fords when we go to our second generation electric vehicles with the NACS interface. So it's really, Elon, I want to thank you and your team. It's been great working with you so far, and I'm really excited about what this means for customers.
Now, in the short term, we'll focus on the impact on Ford. They have a much larger charging network available to them, so this will be absolutely great for them. What this also does is seriously shift the balance of power on what the standard will and should be. And in order to understand that, let's kind of break down manufacturers by region. Over in Asia, you have the Korean manufacturers, Hyundai and Kia. They will probably, of everyone, be the most impacted in the world. And even then, for the vehicles they're importing to Europe, they have to have the CCS2. And for the vehicles they're importing to the United States, they have to have the CCS connector. So they're already making two separate connectors. They'll just move from the CCS to the NACS connector. Japanese car manufacturers honestly won't be impacted too much. They'll be under the same situation as the Korean manufacturers. Add to it that they just don't make that many electric vehicles anyway. So they're early on in this process, so they'll have a really easy transition over to that. European manufacturers, well, they also are already making two different connectors. They're making the CCS2 for Europe and the CCS1 for the United States on their vehicles. And unfortunately, even though the names are similar and their designs are very similar, they're just different enough that you can't use the same connector for both. So they're going to have to, they're already making two connectors. They just have to make the second one a Tesla one instead. This leaves us with the American manufacturers. Well, we already know that the single biggest EV manufacturer in the United States by a long shot is Tesla. And they're obviously already using the Tesla connector, the NACS. Then you have Aptera. And now with Ford, this is who is now the second biggest EV manufacturer. Now you have the first and second biggest EV manufacturers in the country are already using this standard. Kind of makes everyone else start to lean that way. Now you take the third place Chevy, who one, isn't making near as many EVs as Ford, and two, is really going to find themselves in a disadvantage against Ford because they have access to less chargers. Because let's break this down. If you have a CCS connector, at the moment you can't use a Tesla charger. They are adding adapters, but maybe they won't have to do that. But if you go to an EVgo charger, it has CCS and Tesla. If you go to a lot of charge points, they have CCS and Tesla. You go to Electrify America, they have CCS and Tesla. So by having a Tesla connector, you have all the same charging connections you would have had anyway, and you have the supercharger and destination charger network available to you. So they'll find themselves in a huge disadvantage. So it's only a matter of time before they decide to also shift over to the Tesla connector. All right, so that's my take on this. I just threw a quick video together because I thought this was really important to get out. What do you think about this? Do you agree with this transition? Do you think it's a good idea, bad idea?